Hey everybody, welcome back to part 2 of our tutorial series on importing your CrazyTalk assets into your Unity game and using them in your game however you wish. As you may recall, in the last tutorial we created a sprite sheet. It's right here in our assets folder. I'm going to double click on that to show you. And this sprite sheet we exported from Texture Packer, and we used the Texture Packer importer plugin with Unity to create this. We cut it up and we created this sprite sheet that contains 2 animations on the same sprite sheet. So it's saving a lot of resources, saving a lot of space here, and the cutting system in the Texture Packer program is actually really good, and you will rarely have errors with it. So take a look at this sprite sheet, and I'm going to go into my Explorer window here, into our game demo folder. I've also done a couple of other things. I've also created this 1280 by 720 just image here. I exported this from CrazyTalk Animator. This is one of our scenes that you can find in a Working Places content pack in the content store. And then I also have this counter, which is going to be another layer on that scene. And I have an image of Saul, just a portrait image of Saul. And we're going to make that talk later in part 3 of this tutorial series using our CrazyTalk 7 plugin for Unity. So I'm going to close this down right now, and let's go into our scene right now. So we're going to basically in this tutorial create our scene, import in our stuff, and we're going to do a whole bunch of fun stuff to animate our characters, the fun stuff being scripting in this tutorial. So let's go to our demo folder here again. I'm just going to import in a couple of things to my assets folder. So let's just go ahead and create another folder here. Well, let's call this scene images, and I'm going to go back to my demo folder, and I'm just going to import in these 2 images right here and into the scene images folder. And if we go into there, you can see we have the counter and the scene. Now the scene, I'm just going to go ahead and import into my scene up here, and you can see that according to my camera, that's what it's going to look like. Let's make this scene a little bit bigger. We'll stretch it up to about there, and center it about there, and let's enter playback mode and see how the camera looks at it right there. A little bit of space on the right and left side, so let's try and stretch that out a tiny bit more. We can actually even go to our main camera. We can decrease the size there, maybe something like 4.5, and you can see the size of the camera moving right there. We can also move our camera up and down on our scene as well. So I think maybe something like this should be fine. Let's enter play mode just to check that out. That looks perfect. And let's go ahead and edit our counter then. So the counter, we're just going to add it in as an image file here into our scene, and that should be just fine right there. I also wanted to mention that I added another animation here, and this is in the female idol folder. This is basically a sequence of a female character, the exact same thing I did with Saul, just with her own custom idol. And I exported this sprite sheet for the female character as well. Now this one has a lot of extra space, and I'm going to show you how Unity cuts this up in using the sprite editor in Unity in just a moment. But first of all, we're going to import in our Saul character. We need to create our character, and then we need to add a couple of things to him. So for a character, we're going to start off by creating a game object. So let's go game object and create empty, and we'll call this game object Saul. And there we go. So the first thing Saul needs is he needs something to render his body, and that is called a sprite renderer. So let's go to add component, and I'm going to go to rendering, and we have something called the sprite renderer. And there's a sprite field here that currently has no sprites in it. So what we can do is we can go to our animations folder. Let's twirl down the animations, and let's use the idle 000 picture right here, and let's bring that into Saul. So I'm going to click and drag that over to Saul, and you can see that we have it in our scene. Let's zoom in a little bit and pan over here. And that's pretty much where we want Saul to start off. And you can see he's in the scene right there. And he's going to walk up to the counter later on. Now Saul needs a couple of other things as well. The first thing is a rigid body component. So let's go to add component here again, and let's go to physics 2D and rigid body 2D. Now there's a couple of things we want to do here. We want to select fixed angles so Saul doesn't fall over, and we also want to select interpolate to interpolate, and that's pretty much it. That's all we have to do in the rigid body 2D right now. And the next thing we need to do is add a couple of colliders, because he's going to be running on top of a box. Let's go to add component, and add component, there we go, and physics 2D, circle collider, and physics 2D, and box collider. Now there's a great tutorial that Unity did on this. It's a live training, I think back in December 2013. It follows pretty much the same procedures, so if you have any questions, if I'm running through this a little too fast, I recommend you check out that tutorial as well. I'll put the link in the description for you. So let's decrease the radius of this circle, and this is where our character is going to be hitting the ground. So let's move this circle down here, and the reason we're choosing a circle as opposed to a box is if in case our character went up or down a hill, we want him to kind of tilt up or down when he's going up that hill, as opposed to a box, which will just have 45-degree angles. So let's decrease the size of that. There we go, the box collider, and let's move it up a little bit on the y-axis. There we go. And this, we don't really have to have this in this tutorial, but it's always good for your character. If he runs into anything, if we had this as a rigid body right here, he would run into that. So we have Saul in our scene right now. He has a circle collider, rigid body 2D. Let's press play and see what happens. So you can see if Saul will fall through the scene. He's falling a little bit slow, and if we wanted to edit the amount of gravity in our 2D scene, we can go to Edit, we can go to Project Settings, and go to Physics 2D, and you can see our gravity is currently regular gravity. Normally 2D games will have a little bit of a higher gravity, so we'll change that to maybe -30. Press Enter, and let's enter play mode one more time. You can see Saul will fall more like a 2D game object should. So we need something for Saul to stand on. We can just simply go ahead and create a game object. Let's create a cube. And I'm just going to move this cube down to about there. And then we'll scale this up on the x-axis. Let's try about 20. I think that should be okay. And we can move this over slightly. Maybe 25 will do. There we go. It doesn't really matter how big it is or what size it is. We're going to turn off its mesh renderer. Let's try and place it right under Saul's feet there. Maybe a little bit further down. And then move Saul a little bit down as well. We're trying to do this from too far away. There we go. I think that should be just about fine right there. And when we have this cube here, we can just call it floor or whatever we want. Just floor to keep things, whoops. I need to learn how to spell floor. Floor, there we go. And we want to make sure that the box collider is removed, and we want to replace that with a Physics 2D box collider. So there we go, we have the Physics 2D box collider, and that's going to be something for Saul to stand on. So let's go ahead, turn off the mesh renderer so we can't see it, and press play now. You can see Saul is just standing there, and that's exactly what we want him to do. He's not animated yet, but he's going to be standing there. Let's move this counter up a little bit as well. There we go. Now to make Saul animate, we're going to have to do a couple things to make him animate. The first thing is we're going to need to add an animator onto our game object. So let's go to Add Component here, Miscellaneous, and Animator. And we have an animator now, but we have no Animator Controller. So let's go to our Assets folder, and I'm going to just create an animator in the main folder here. Animator Controller rather. And let's call this Saul. There we go. And I'm going to select Saul here, and click and drag that Animator Controller into the controller slot in the animator. And basically this controller is going to contain all of our animations, and this is what we're going to be accessing with the animator. Now I need to go to the animation folder here, and we're going to make sure we have Saul selected here. We're going to create a new animation for Saul. So let's go ahead and create a new clip. We'll call this clip idle, and go ahead and save that. And we have idle right here, and this is on Saul. Now we need to find our sprite sheet. So let's go to the animations and the animation sprite sheet. I'm going to click and select all of our idle sprites that Texture Packer has cut out. And I'm going to click and drag over here. And so now we have this idle motion. You can see our character moving. If I click and drag up the timeline, I'm going to decrease the sample size to make him idle a little bit slower, down to 30. You can see the result right here. Let's go ahead and play that back and take a look. So I'm going to play this back. You can see Saul's kind of just idling there in the corner of our scene. So we have animation success. Let's go to our animator right here. So we need to select Saul first and go to our animator. And you can see we have the idle motion here. The orange indicates that it's our default motion. Our character will have this motion when he's not doing anything else. And now we need to create a run animation. So let's go ahead and do that. With Saul selected again, let's go here and create a new clip. And I'm going to select run. And the run animation is going to be okay. You can see it's right here. Now I need to select all those run sprites that have been cut out. Select all of these, and let's go ahead and click and drag these into our animation tab here. And you can see, oops, let's go ahead and to scene. you see Saul will do his running right here. And that's all fine, that's all good. Let's decrease the sample size to 30 again. And you can see he will do his little run right here. You can also preview it. The idle is there right now. And that's because the idle is our default motion. So basically we have this run right here. We can kind of see it right here and it looks okay. But let's go ahead to our animator and let's do a couple things. First of all, I'm going to hold Alt key and kind of just go up here. And I'm going to move this run up here. We need to create some transitions from the idle to the run. I'm going to create a parameter first, float parameter, and this one's going to be called speed. There we go. So we have one parameter, and we have to have the condition for when the idle transitions to the run, and vice versa. So I'm going to right-click on the idle square little animation here, and go select Make Transition, and then click on the run. And then going to do the same thing with the run, make transition, back to idle. And then what I need to do is click on this arrow right here, and this little thing will come up here on the right hand side, and we need to set conditions for when the transition happens from idle to run. And now we have this speed variable we created, our float value rather, and let's go greater. Speed is greater than 0.01, so as soon as we press the arrow key he's going to be moving, and then vice versa. When he goes from run to idle, we need to select speed is less than 0.01. Okay, so we have our animator all set up in our scene, but currently we have nothing to tell the animator what the parameters are. So that's why we need to create a script. And the script is going to give directions for when Saul runs, where he runs, and when he flips from side to side and all that stuff. So in our assets folder, let's create another folder called scripts. Oops, scripts. There we go. And in my scripts folder, I'm going to right click, create a C# script. And we're going to call this Saul Annie. For lack of a better name, we'll just double click this, and this will open up MonoDevelop. So we have Saul in our scene, and we want to make him animate. We want to make him move rather than just sit there and idle. So this is where the scripting comes in. We're going to do a script. This is the same script that I got from that Unity live training tutorial. So we can see the beginnings of our script right here. What we need to do first is let's take this out. We need to declare a couple of values. So I'm going to declare a public float, and this one is going to be called max speed. I'm going to make that equal to 10f, 10 float. So this is basically the speed our character is going to be going at. And I also want to create a Boolean, and this one is going to be for when our character flips right and left. So I'm going to call this facing right because our character is facing right, and this is going to be called, we're going to set this to true to start off. And then we'll move on here, and I want to call our, let's just say animator, we'll call it anim for lack of a better name. And down here, void start. So in the void start section, we want to get component, and that's going to be our animator. There we go. And then let's move on to void update. But because we have physics in our scene, we want to change this to void fixed update. Whenever you're using physics, you want to use fixed update right here. Okay, so in here, we need to get to the nitty-gritty of our character movement. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a float called move, and that's going to equal to input get axis, there we go. And we're going to call it the horizontal axis. Okay, and we'll close that off. And that's basically getting the info for which button is pressed on the horizontal axis, left or right. So let's go to anim, next line, set float, and we're going to say speed right here, speed, and comma, and then we're going to use this math f dot absolute, and then move. All right, and then let's move on to define our rigid body velocity. So rigid body 2D, make sure you say 2D, velocity equals to new vector 2, and we're going to say move times max speed, comma, rigid body 2D dot velocity dot y, and there we go. But I want to make sure this rigid body is lowercase rather. There we go. Rigid body, that looks okay to me. Okay, so now we have to create a function called flip. So let's go ahead and create a void flip, and let's open up some curly braces here. And we're going to just say facing right is not equal to facing right, and vector 3, the scale equals to transform local scale. And essentially what this function is doing is it's taking information from the world axis here, and it's kind of basically flipping things around. And let's go to the next one here, the scale.x equals to -1, and transform dot local scale equals to the scale. Now I'm by no means an expert in the art of coding, but like I mentioned, there's that Unity tutorial, the live training, which is a lot more comprehensive on the coding part. Basically what we're doing here is we're just setting a function for the Boolean value to, if we press the left key, it's going to basically rotate the character left and right. Now to do that, we need to set an if statement within our fixed update. So let's go back to fixed update up here, and I want to say if, here we go, move is greater than 0, and not facing, I really can't type today, facing right, then we want to flip. That's the function we defined below. And then else if, we need an else if statement as well, so move is less than 0, and 0 and facing right. Right, there we go. And we want to flip. And that should be good for our code, so we can take a look at it and then just press Control S and save it. Let's go back into Unity here, and let's give that a shot. Let's apply it to Sol and see what happens. Let's go ahead and click and drag our script down to the Add Component section there, and that script is now added to Sol. You can see max speed is set to 10, just like I said it earlier. And let's go ahead and play this back. And so you see Sol is kind of just doing his idle there, and now we have Sol kind of running around. So that's pretty cool. That's exactly what we wanted. He can run left and right, and he's flipping back and forth, and if he stops, he's just idling there. So there we go. That's basically what we wanted to achieve. What I might want to do is, because his legs are kind of going through our feet are kind of going through the ground there, maybe I want to raise that box a little bit, raise the floor a little bit, maybe about there, and let's set Sol a little bit higher. Let's actually bring that mesh renderer on so we can see it a bit better. There we go. I think that should be fine. Let's give that a shot. That's a little bit better, I think. We're fine right there. So now when Sol comes up to the counter, there's going to be a girl behind the counter. And let's go ahead and put that girl behind the counter right now. Now the way I exported this girl from Texture Packer is a little bit different than the way I did with Sol. And you'll see what I mean in just a moment. So let's go to back to our animations folder right here. And I'm going to just twirl this down. I'm going to create a folder for our female. And we're going to go into that folder right there. And then back to my Explorer folder. And we're just going to basically click and drag this sprite sheet into this folder. And this time around, we're going to use Unity's sprite editor to cut this up. And we'll see the a different way to do it. So we have the female idle. Again, we need to just press Control-Shift-N and create a new game object for this character. And F2 to rename it. We'll call it Sandra, since that's the character in CrazyTalk Animator. We need to add a rigid body 2D. Again, we need to add a sprite renderer right here. Now, before we do anything, again, fixed angle and interpolate, set that to interpolate. Before we do anything, we need to go into this sprite sheet and take a look at it. So this is our sprite sheet right here, and you can see we don't have anything cut up yet. So when I select my sprite sheet, this little thing pops up in the inspector, and we have the option to use the sprite editor. But first, I want to select multiple for sprite mode. So if you have a sprite sheet, remember to always select multiple. This is a pretty powerful function within Unity. It can actually cut up the sprites itself. So now we want to go into the sprite editor, and we want to select a couple things in the sprite editor in Unity. We need to slice and dice this idle motion up. So on the top left here, we have this option for slice. I'm going to select that. You can select automatic. We'll leave the pivot at center, and I want to select smart for my slice mode, and then I'm just going to go ahead and slice it up and see what happens. So now you can see that Unity pretty much did the same thing as Texture Packer. So let's go ahead and apply it, and let's see how this worked out. Now we're not going to bother applying any of that physics stuff to Sandra here. You can see that we have all of the sprites cut out here. Let's go to Sandra, and let's just drag this one into the sprite render. And there we have Sandra in our scene. And she's kind of sitting in front of the desk, which is not what we want. So now we need to adjust our layers. And you can see down here we have order and layer at 0. I want this table to be in front of her, so I'm going to select this one and move it to 1. So now it's in front of her. Maybe we can move Sandra up a tiny little bit, and maybe we can even just move Saul up a little bit as well. Again, this floor, bring it up and bring Saul up just so he's kind of equal with Sandra right there. Let's go ahead and play back and see what happens here. So you can see Sandra falls through the floor. She doesn't have the physics on her. So let's quickly create that box collider for Sandra. Let's just go ahead and physics 2D. Let's give her a box collider since she's not going to be moving. And the box collider, that looks okay. And we'll just maybe move her down a little bit. Maybe about there. And let's move that desk down a tiny little bit as well to cover her feet. And the floor, let's turn off the mesh render and play back one more time. And there we go. So another thing you can notice here is that Saul looks totally fine. He looks cool. Sandra looks like she's from a game a long time ago. Oh, we also need to push her out of the way there. We also need to do one more thing to Sandra's sprite sheet. So let's take a look at the sprite sheet one more time. And now when we exported this sprite sheet, let's take a look. The sprite sheet is set to maximum size 1024. And actually this sprite sheet, I used the same 500 by 500 dimensions when I was exporting all the individual sequence images. So it actually ended up being 4096 by 4096. And you can see it's very large. So let's select 4096 from the max size here. And let's go ahead and apply that. Let's take a look at the difference. So now you can see right away that she cleans up quite a bit. So let's go ahead and play that back one more time and take a look. So the only thing is she's not moving, and that's because we need a couple things to add to her. If you can recall, we need to add an animator right here, and we need to create an animation for her. So again, with the animations female, we can just create an animator in this. We'll actually just make it in our main folder here. Create Animator Controller. We'll call this one Sandra. And pretty much the same thing as Saul. We need to go to Animation and make sure Sandra is selected and create a new clip. We'll call this Sandra Idle. That's okay right there. And we'll select all of those sprites from our, whoops, that's Saul there. We go into the female folder there. Select all of these female idle sprites right here. And we want to bring those into our animation window here. Again, I'll choose a sample size of 30. That should be fine. And you can see Sandra's, look at her, she's kind of jerking around a little bit. So we're going to solve that in just a moment, but first I want to show you exactly what I mean. So we're going to maximize on play. And you can see she's kind of like a little bit shaky. And this is because when we exported Sandra, we cut up the sprites in an interesting way, a little bit different from the way we use with Texture Packer. So let's go ahead and select our sprite again, Sprite Editor. And what I want to try this time is I want to go slice, and this time I want to try grid. And I want to try 500 by 500. If you can recall, that is the size that we exported. And the pivot, I'm going to leave the pivot at the center and see what happens. And so let's go slice again. Now you can see it ends up like this. And I'm going to go ahead and apply it. And this is using up a lot more space. But sometimes you may have to do this. It depends on your individual image sequence export. But normally with Texture Packer, I've had no problem with this at all. So let's go ahead and close this down. And I'm going to try it one more time. Now you can see she's kind of jerking back and forth even more. So what's going on here? We need to actually go to Sandra one more time, or the female idle, and let's go into the sprite editor one final time. And I want to select slice again, and I want to choose automatic, and I want to choose pivot point at the bottom. And then I want to go smart and slice it one more time. Now the pivot point is at the bottom now, and let's see what happens when I apply this time. So let's close this down, and now with the pivot point at the bottom, you can see she's kind of boosted up there, so we need to bring her back down. And let's bring her back down to about there, and we need to readjust her box collider 2D. Let's bring that up to about there, that's fine. And let's go ahead and play this back and see what happens. There you can see now she's doing her nice little idle. So sometimes you may have to, if you export directly into Unity, your sprite sheet directly into Unity, without using Texture Packer. You may have to do a couple of adjustments like this. You may have to adjust the pivot points. Try fooling around with the basic sprite slicing, or sprite slicing rather, and the automatic and different options right there. Normally you'll be able to fix it by just fooling around with those options a little bit. So this is what we have here. We have Saul running around saying what's up. Oh, and we also need to change Saul's layer again. Although it is fun to push Sandra out of the way, we want him to walk in front of the counter, so let's make sure he's on layer 3 in our sprite render and play back one more time. And here we go. There we go. Oh, he still runs into her, but that's okay. Now we have Saul. He's got the whole airport to himself. Now, that's about it for this tutorial. That's all I wanted to cover here. In the next tutorial, we're going to use the CrazyTalk 7 plugin for Unity, and we're going to create a dialogue character to appear on our screen whenever Saul runs up to the desk there. And that's going to trigger a little animation for our character. So that's about it for this tutorial again. Thanks for watching. Hopefully you learned something about importing your CTA assets into Unity. And stay tuned for part 3 of this tutorial series where we finish it off and create that dialogue character.